Hello and welcome to Navigating OCD, the podcast where we discuss all things OCD. As normal, I want to start off by saying I am not a therapist or a medical professional, although one day I do hope to be in this field. I'm just someone sharing their personal experience with OCD and what they have learned so far in the recovery journey. Okay, so last episode I kind of covered um, my personal journey into OCD, even though I feel that that was still, even though it was a half an hour episode, I still feel like it only covered the tip of the iceberg. But then, so I thought today, what I should really cover is what OCD is, and probably more importantly, what OCD actually isn't, because all the myths, what we hear in society, what television, what all these things tell us OCD is so far from the truth. So I thought if we do a whole episode covering this, it might help to dispel that stereotype a little bit. And for people who maybe are thinking, do I perhaps have OCD? Not reassurance wise, by the way. But if someone is thinking, do I perhaps have OCD? This might give them a little bit more insight into what OCD actually is. Okay, so let's start with what OCD is. So OCD stands for obsessive compulsive disorder. And if we break that down, it involves obsessions and compulsions. Now, stereotypically, we hear in society that our obsessions with OCD are usually all about cleanliness, tidiness, order, perfectionism, and that is really not true. If we're going to break down what OCD is, we need to throw that myth out the window, because OCD can be about absolutely anything at all. Your obsession can be about anything. Although some people, well, not some people, a lot of people do have contamination OCD, which would kind of cover those topics, obsessions about germs and things like that. That's actually probably quite a small percentage of what OCD actually is. And unfortunately, that misconception, I think, leads a lot of people to being misdiagnosed, not diagnosed at all, thinking that they're going crazy, even not to be morbid so quickly, but leading them to suicide because they don't actually realise that what they're experiencing is OCD, because we're so led in society to believe that OCD is just wanting to be clean and tidy and checking the locks and having our house nice and in order. So then in OCD, we have the obsessions, which is the O, which is then followed by compulsions, which is the C, obviously in OCD. And our compulsions are basically any behaviour, whether that be mental or physical, that we do to relieve the anxiety caused by the obsession, which is the topic of OCD. So compulsions, once again, stereotypically, we might see compulsions as being like cleaning, and putting things in order because of our obsession, which is like, this needs to be perfect, which once again isn't true. Compulsions can be absolutely anything from mental review, checking the past, neutralizing thoughts, to things such as counting, that can be a compulsion, reassurance seeking, checking. All these things, anything that we may do to relieve that anxiety caused by the obsession is a compulsion. And ultimately, doing these compulsions are what keeps us in the OCD cycle. So if you imagine a circle, so we've got the obsession that pops up, and due to the obsession, we start feeling anxiety. Following the anxiety, we want to bring it down, so we perform a compulsion. Our anxiety then reduces, but OCD, that's not enough for OCD. ultimately our anxiety spikes up again. And that's probably one of the um, defining factors of what makes it OCD, because obviously we all experience intrusive thoughts and worries, and we all might do things to work those worries out. Um, but what differentiates OCD is that's impossible. So if like the average person has a worry pop up in the head or has a thought pop up in the head, they might be able to counteract that thought with, "Oh, I wouldn't do that," or "Oh, I don't think that would that happened," or "That's unlikely because of X, Y, Z," and then that thought kind of moves on. With OCD, that thought does not move on. It's in your head, well, dependent, I was about to say 24/7. For chronic severe OCD, 24/7, 365, it does not stop. Um, Obviously, milder OCD, you might have it for like days or periods of it coming on and off and things like that. But more severe OCD, it's there all the time. And I've experienced both in my life. I did mention this in the last episode. So I used to probably, when I was younger, have more milder OCD, although I can remember periods when it was more severe. In hindsight, at the time, as a child, I just thought I was worrying, or I thought that these things were real. And then around 4 years ago, my OCD just became chronic. I did cover all this in the last episode if you want to go back and listen to it. But that shows I've kind of experienced both sides of the coin with OCD. So going back to the OCD cycle, because I kind of went off on a little bit of a tangent there. So you have the obsessions, which raises the anxiety, the compulsions, which brings down the anxiety, and then you just get the obsession again. And that cycle goes round and round and round and round. And the more we engage in the cycle, the stronger the cycle actually gets, and the worse our OCD becomes. So what we have to do, this is obviously a huge episode or episodes to cover, but just keeping it short and sweet, we have to cut the compulsions out of that cycle, because we can't cut the obsessions because we're not in control of the thoughts popping up. But what we are in control of is the compulsions. So as an OCD sufferer, we cut out the compulsions, which is extremely difficult. If you're listening and you don't have OCD, I don't want to underplay how hard it is to cut out compulsions. It's really, really hard. I almost think of it sometimes like telling an alcoholic not to drink, or telling like a drug addict not to take drugs. It can feel like an addiction, and our compulsions also can feel very automatic. So cutting these out can be very difficult. That's obviously a whole episode in itself, but just to cover over that, that is one of the ways, or one of the key parts of breaking down that OCD cycle. There is a lot more that goes into it, but that is how we'd kind of start stopping that cycle from going round and round and round. So although I've already touched on it, I'll discuss what OCD isn't. OCD isn't just about cleanliness. It isn't just about perfectionism. As I said before, obsessions can be about absolutely anything. But what we do have are basically categories that we can lump OCD obsessions into. And there's like a lot of common subtypes. So, of course, contamination OCD, which is what people seem to hear about the most. But then you can also have harm OCD, relationship OCD, suicide OCD, false memory OCD, real event OCD. The list goes on and on and on. Sensory motor OCD. And basically these are categories for what your obsession could perhaps fall under. But what a lot of OCD sufferers do is they want their obsession to fall perfectly within the category, to almost solidify the fact that it is OCD. Now, OCD is not going to do that. It's not going to fall perfectly into a category. So if your OCD theme doesn't, now I don't want to, I'm not saying this in terms of reassurance, but if your OCD theme doesn't fall perfectly into a category, that doesn't mean it's not OCD. We just need to stop trying to fit it into one of these subtypes. That's basically a compulsion because you're trying to prove to yourself that it is OCD, which ultimately would lower your anxiety. So what are some of the common symptoms of OCD? I'd start by firstly saying OCD can be extremely debilitating. When I was at my worst, I don't know how I got through that period of my life. Some of the symptoms, I'd have both mental and physical symptoms. The mental ones were a lot worse for me personally, but obviously the physical ones aren't great either. So my obsessions would be on a constant loop in my mind. There wouldn't be a single second of the day where I wasn't doing an obsession or a compulsion. And at the time, I didn't realize that what I was doing was compulsions, which was making everything 20 times worse. But yeah, I didn't have a second of the day when I wasn't obsessing over something. Due to that, I had extreme anxiety, like anxiety through the roof. I could barely eat. I think I lost about 2 stone at the time. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't function. I couldn't work. I couldn't concentrate on anything other than my OCD. It demanded my attention 24/7, 365. And alongside that, I also got a lot of physical symptoms. I became extremely jumpy. Like it was like my nervous system was all out of whack. But I would become jumpy at absolutely anything. I would shake a lot. I would feel nauseous a lot and heave a lot. I had stomach issues. I was always shaking. I remember, I would like shake all the time. The list goes on. I could probably list symptoms forever. And obviously there were other symptoms as well that people can experience, like there's DPDR, which is depersonalization, derealization. I don't think I had that massively. I did have it a little bit, but it wasn't a huge issue for me. But with some people with OCD, that can be a huge issue as well. But the symptoms go on. It's an extremely debilitating disorder. I think it's actually, I've seen this online and I've posted on Instagram before. It's in the top 10 most debilitating disorders of any kind, which sounds absolutely crazy because when you hear the term OCD bounced around, you're like, you can't understand how that can be debilitating for someone if you believe in the OCD stereotypes, when actually the real disorder, it's extremely debilitating. And to get through it, to work on recovery, it needs so much strength. It is by far the hardest thing I have ever experienced in my whole life. And don't want to jump ahead. I hope I don't get anything much worse than that in my life. But if I do get anything just as bad, at least now I know that I can handle it, because OCD it's not for the weak. It is really, really difficult. And that's something that I think people really do need to know, because if you've got a family member or someone with OCD, you may not realize just how hard it is living day in, day out with that disorder. But saying that, I don't want that to sound negative, because there is so much hope now. There are ways that we can work on our OCD. So many ways we can improve it. So many ways we can make. I know of some people who've made full recoveries. So it is possible. It just takes a lot of hard work and patience, because it's not a quick or easy journey. There'll be lots of ups and downs and setbacks and relapses, and you'll feel like you're not getting anywhere at all. I felt like that probably 50, not even 50 times, hundreds of times over the past 4 years. But we actually are. We actually are having subtle improvements, and over time they really do add up, and there is hope, and that is recovery is possible from OCD. So now we've kind of covered what OCD is and what OCD isn't. Let's dispel a few myths about OCD to help us kind of understand it a little bit more. So I've already covered the kind of germ perfectionism myth, so I won't go back over that again. But first myth I will cover is that you can always see when someone has OCD, or that you can always see their compulsions. This is categorically false. A lot of people with OCD, myself included, OCD is mainly all in their mind. Some people, you can just have 100% mental OCD. Mine's probably 95% mental. I have had some physical compulsions, but the majority of my compulsions are mental, especially now. I found it easier, I'm not going to say easy because it wasn't. I found it easier to cut out the physical compulsions, and then the mental ones I have and continue to find harder to cut out, because I feel like I have less control over those. So yeah, dispelling the myth. You can't always see when someone has OCD. You're not going to see them like lining things up. Obviously, some people may, and you might not see them cleaning and all that kind of stuff. Trust me, my house does not look like someone who has OCD. Yeah, your best friend could have OCD and you don't even know. When I was at my worst, and I tell you, it was absolutely horrendous. The only people I really told was my partner and my parents. Nobody else really knew. And that shows how I just went on with my life, and someone from the outside might have looked in and think I was fine, or there wasn't anything going on, or they wouldn't be able to see that OCD, but it was actually absolutely horrendous inside. Yeah, so you can't always see that someone's got OCD. It's not like you're going to see them doing their physical compulsions. A lot of it can be mental. Okay, the next myth number 2, OCD is a personality trait. OCD is not a personality trait at all. When you kind of hear people say, oh, I'm a little bit OCD, or I've got a bit of OCD, that's not how it works. And I try, even though it can be a little bit aggravating when you hear people say that, I try to give them the benefit of the doubt, because I know that they don't mean any harm by it. That's probably what they genuinely do think OCD is. But I do think we need to start cracking down on dispelling that myth, because it's I think I said this last episode, but it's not helping people know that that's what they're suffering from. It's just perpetuating the myths about OCD. So yeah, OCD isn't a personality trait. It is a legitimate mental health disorder, and you either have OCD or you don't. It's not like it's not a personality trait. Although I do actually believe, and this is not based on any this isn't based on any scientific research. It's just based on my own assessments of myself and other people I've met online who have OCD. I do think people with OCD have a lot of similar personality traits. So I think that they're naturally maybe more empathetic people, more that they worry more, a little bit maybe more compassionate. And I think a lot of people with OCD have these personality traits, and because of that, OCD can latch even more. I hope I've explained that well. But I think we're a lot more sensitive, and OCD really clings to that. Once again, no scientific basis to this. It's just what I have kind of observed myself. So yeah, as much as it is not a personality trait, I do think we have a lot of similar personality traits, people with OCD. Okay, myth number 3, people with OCD are aware they have OCD. Once again, categorically false. I didn't know I had OCD until about 4 years ago, when in hindsight, which I mentioned earlier, I think I probably had it my whole life. But because it was more mild to moderate, especially being a child as well, I just thought I was a worrier. I thought that what I was thinking was real. I couldn't, I didn't differentiate it between my imagination and reality. I just thought it was reality. And until that got more severe, that was only when I started to realise something was seriously going wrong. Up until this point, I did not know I had OCD, even though now I can look back and see periods of my life. I never had it for years until, like, when I say for years, I didn't have like year-long episodes until maybe like 4 years ago. But I would have month-long episodes. But I, one, just believed it. And two, I just didn't tell anybody about it, and I just got on with it. And once again, I didn't know that it was OCD that I was experiencing. I thought it was reality, and I thought I was, well, very anxious, but that's because I thought I was dealing with reality. Whereas now, obviously, I can look back and understand that's OCD. But I didn't know I had OCD. And a lot of people with OCD are probably walking around not knowing they have OCD. If they do think they've got some kind of mental health issue, they've probably been misdiagnosed, because it's, I don't want to muck up the exact statistic, but I'm sure it's 50.5% of the time OCD is misdiagnosed, because even healthcare practitioners, they don't understand what OCD is. And I don't want to say that to knock them, but it is the reality. I do think there needs to be more education within that field on OCD, because a lot of people, they might have OCD, but they're actually being given labels such as depression, anxiety, psychosis, schizophrenia, and they're being misdiagnosed because people don't actually understand what OCD truly is. So I think the more education we get in that sector, of course, consequently, the more people are going to end up being diagnosed correctly. Okay, myth number 4, OCD is just about worrying too much. Once again, this is categorically not true. I do feel sometimes when I put I've got an Instagram page, which a lot of you might be from, at navigating.ocd, but when I put posts up, I think that they can sometimes be misinterpreted, because I think people might look at them and think, oh, maybe I've got OCD because they do worry a lot or that kind of thing. But OCD is very different to just being an extreme worrier, for example. With OCD, you get caught up in the compulsive cycle, and that's what differentiates it. And there's no kind of shaking it off, as I mentioned earlier, which with even it as a very anxious, maybe worrier or worrying type person, you might be able to resolve it and end up shaking it off. Whereas with OCD, that doesn't really work. You can never kind of, no matter, even if you had like rock hard evidence, you still wouldn't believe it. And you can't shake that worry away, which is why you result into doing the compulsions and keep going round and round and round in that cycle. And even if, which is extremely rare, but even if you do find some kind of resolution, OCD just gives you a brand new thing to try and resolve. which is called morphing. So it might morph themes or it might morph questions, the question, whatever it's trying to get you to resolve. But that's kind of what differentiates it from just being a normal warrior or a normal kind of anxious person. It is that you get stuck in this very debilitating cycle that just gets worse and worse and worse. Now, myth number 5 is medication can cure OCD. Once again, this isn't true. We can take medication to help with the anxiety caused by OCD, but there is currently no medication out there that can actually cure OCD. OCD needs to be tackled through therapy and behavioural changes like cutting your compulsions and acceptance work. We can't just take a pill, even though that would be a blessing. We can't just take a pill to cure OCD. We can only take them to kind of help manage it a bit. And I'm not saying it doesn't help manage it, because it does. I take medication for my OCD, and it helps like kind of lower the anxiety caused by it. So I'm more at a level where I could function. But it by no stretch got rid of the thoughts or kind of the OCD in itself. That takes a lot of work and input from the individual to kind of work over that. It can't just be taken away by a pill, even though I do wish it could. Now, last but not least, and this is similar to myth number 4, but it's that OCD thoughts are no different from normal intrusive thoughts. Obviously, everybody experiences intrusive thoughts. We've all thought, oh, what if I fall out this window, or what if I hit this person, etc. The difference with OCD is that these thoughts stick. You can't get rid of the thoughts. You can't shake them off. So imagine you have an intrusive thought, and with that is the feelings that it's 100% real and that it's 100% going to happen. That's how OCD feels. And then you can't shake that off. You can't just move on from it. It'll be like, oh, no, that's not going to happen. Very similar to what I was saying about the worries. I suppose these two kind of overlap a little bit. It sticks and becomes like an obsession. Like, you have to think of it like actual, when you see people that actually have obsessions, that's what it is. That's what OCD is. You have an obsession, and it's an unwanted obsession. You don't want it to be there, but it's being played in your head all day, every day. And that's when we try and get rid of the obsession with the compulsions, like I said before, and it just ends up spiraling out of control. So yeah, that's myth number 6. Normal intrusive thoughts from the average person aren't the same as OCD. There is a big difference there. Okay, so that is all from today. I hope you've enjoyed today's podcast. I'm gonna put a question box up on my Instagram page at navigating.ocd for some more submissions on some of the next few podcasts. I definitely want to talk about podcasts and hormones from like a female perspective. I do want to talk about, I suppose, a little bit more of a touchy subject, but OCD and like pregnancy and having babies, once again from a women's perspective, because when I have spoke about that on Instagram, the amount of you that have messaged me about that, and it's also a massive part of my OCD as well, that I think that we should talk about, because you don't ever really see people talk about this online. And as much as it'll definitely be an exposure for me, talking about it on here, but I think that would be a good episode to do, for my fellow ladies. So yeah, I've got those kind of few ideas coming up for the next few, but I will pop a question box up as well for any more ideas you guys have. I also obviously want to delve more into OCD treatment, the different subtypes. Like there's so much that we can cover. But yeah, that's it. I hope you enjoyed today's podcast. If you've got any comments, leave them below, and I will see you next week. Bye.